So this is a video I've been thinking about making for a while now, but a combination of me helping out with other people's projects and school hounding me at every single conceivable corner of my free time, this is unfortunately a video I had to push back all the way up until the end of my semester. But being that it's now summer and I'll have a lot more spare time in my hands, upon numerous requests, I finally decided to take the time to go over in a full-fledged video my method of creating custom mocap animations. So as a disclaimer, or well, more as a piece of advice, if you're basing whether or not you want to do this method off of some cherry-picked results in Police Archive, just do bear in mind that a lot of the, quote, crappy animations in that tape was mainly due to me having to cut corners based off of not only my budget as a college kid in crippling debt, but also the fact that this method wasn't really developed or fully realized yet up until about halfway into production, meaning that before that point, I was forced to combine Mixamo animations together to fit specific scenarios. Instead, if it were me at least, I would entirely gauge your opinion on this method based on the results shown in this video, as well as, the other times in Police Archive where the fucking animation looks fine, because, this method should make the output fairly usable. Also bear in mind that this tutorial is not going over the absolute best way to do mocap, it's just going over a cheap and more affordable way of doing mocap. Because if you're like me, and you don't have $3,000 to throw away, this method is really going to help you out on at least getting started making usable mocap animations that, won't require you to sell a kidney in order to make them. I'm also not claiming that this is the absolute definitive most affordable way to do mocap. I'm just simply relaying my findings and research into this topic during the production of Police Archive to spread down to whomever is interested in it. Alright, so with all that out the way, let's waste no more time and get into the things you'll need to make this happen. First off, you'll need a Microsoft Kinect unit of some kind. Personally, I use the Xbox One Kinect or the Kinect 2 since it's given me better results overall, but you probably could get away with using a 360 Kinect as well. This might be the common thing that you may already have on hand with you if you've ever owned an Xbox at some point, but Kinects usually go for about 10 to 50 bucks online in case you need to actually buy one. The next thing you'll need, which might be something you don't have, is a Kinect to USB adapter. This will basically allow you to plug your Kinect into your computer. These are also pretty cheap as well, with the 360 Kinect adapters only being about 10 bucks and the ones for the Kinect 2 being only about 40. If you're using the Xbox One Kinect, I'd recommend buying the official USB adapter made by Microsoft themselves, since the knockoff ones are pretty fucking annoying to use overall, and trust me when I say it's worth the extra cash in order to get as many frames out of your Kinect as possible. Next thing you'll need is the drivers for your respective Kinect device. Most likely one that you buy is probably not going to have these pre-installed, so I'll have a link in the description to where you can download the drivers from the Microsoft page itself. Next up, you'll need a Mocap Studio software, or basically something that will actually record and translate your mocap data. The software I personally use is called IPI, or IPI Mocap Studio 4, and for this guy specifically, you'll need both the recorder and the Mocap Studio app. The recorder app is what actually records your mocap data, while the studio app is what translates that data onto a skeleton rig. Now do bear in mind, you can use both apps completely for free, however you can only use the Mocap Studio app free for 30 days once you open it. Now I of course do not consider the license to buy this software permanently cheap in any regard, however compared to the, quote, cheaper option for mocap, I mean, you do the math. Not only that, but there's another software called Brecklebody, which gives you a lot more trial days and it has a full license version that's a few dollars cheaper. I personally haven't used it enough to give it a definitive recommendation, but if you manage to make it work out, then awesome. Finally, since all my homies use Blender, I'll be using Blender as my 3D software of choice, along with another important thing you'll need for this guide, the Rococo Blender add-on, which will allow you to retarget animations from one rig to another. This will allow you to actually transfer your mocap data to a similar rig you already have set up for a character, which usually for me is a Mixamo rig. The link to download both of these will be in the description below, and I'll explain how to actually set it up once we get closer to that section. Alright, so the basic setup is essentially you'll just need enough space to move around as much as you need, while also making sure the Kinect has a clear and unobstructed view of your motion capture area. You also need to make sure that the Kinect is far enough away from your computer to still be plugged in. If you're using a Kinect 2, I'd recommend screwing it onto a camera tripod, since it has a hole at the bottom for you to actually screw on a tripod adapter. That way the Kinect will not only be held in place, but also elevated high enough to cover your desired area. Since this method is limited by only what the Kinect can see, your Kinect's view of the scene is a very important part of this process. Once your Kinect is set up, make sure your USB adapter is hooked up correctly and is plugged in all the way. For Kinect 2 users, it's a bit more complicated, but most adapters have instructions on what goes where on the device itself, so I'm sure you guys can figure it out. The deal is, though, with knockoff adapters, or at least in my case, some USB ports work while others don't work as well. That may be the case with the official adapter as well, but I wouldn't know because I don't own one, but I know for a fact that at least on my computer, some USB ports just don't recognize the adapter correctly, and you may need to find the right USB port in order to make it work. But I'd only really be concerned about this in case you're dropping frames or your USB adapter isn't being recognized recognized by your computer. Also bear in mind that in case you're still dropping frames, it may be due to other devices plugged in as well. So if you have like a Razer keyboard or a mouse or something like that, then unplugging certain devices may help you gain more frames in case that's still being an issue for you. Alright, once you have everything set up and your Kinect device is plugged into your computer, double check to make sure that the correct drivers are installed. I'll leave a link to install the drivers for both Kinects down in the description, but just download the exe file and run through the download process and you should be good to go after that. Once you've done that, you should now be able to open up your Mocap software of choice and get to recording Mocap data. To start recording, go ahead and open up the IPI Recorder app. This is the app you'll be using to actually record your motion capture data. If all went well in the setup process, you should now see your Kinect device listed. Go ahead and select your device and hit record video on the top right. From here you can check not only how many frames you're getting from your Kinect device, but also see if your Kinect is functioning normally, as well as test how much of your surroundings it can see. I would take this time to not only make sure you're getting at least 20 to 30 frames a second, but also to make sure your Kinect can see your entire body wherever you intend to go. Once that's done, select background at the top here. This will have your Kinect take a picture of your background, so just the depth data of you moving will be captured. I would just set the duration to enough time in order for you to get out of the view of the camera, but basically all you need to do is just hit evaluate background, make sure nothing else is moving, stand out of the view of the camera, and once the timer finally runs down, it'll take a depth map picture of your immediate background. After this picture is taken, I'd make sure not to move anything from here, as new or moved objects in the camera's view will be picked up as unnecessary data in the software itself. From here, you can now go over to the record section, and this is where you're going to actually start recording Mocap data. Go ahead and set the start delay to enough time for you to actually step into your shot. Once you hit record, get into position and wait for the timer to run down. But make sure you always start your recording with a T-pose. This will not only help with retargeting later on, but it will also make it a lot easier to fit your skeleton rig onto your Mocap data. From here, you can do what you want, act out your scene, do your Mocap business, and once you're finally finished recording, just simply hit stop recording. Once you do that, you'll get this tab that pops up that says recording results, in which case you can either view the recording, send it to the Mocap studio, rename the footage, delete it in case it was a bad take, or store it in a folder. I'd recommend opening your video and trimming out sections of you walking to and from your computer in order to start or stop the recordings, as that will be included in the Mocap data unless you trim it out now. Once you're done making your changes, go ahead and save over your footage to replace the one without edits on it. Once you've created your recording and you're good with how it came out, you can now send it to the Mocap studio in order to translate your data into the skeleton rig. Alright, so if you're using the trial version, it'll let you know beforehand that you've got about 30 consecutive days before the trial version ends, and then they lock you out of some features. But the trial version should allow you to do this entire process up until it expires, in which case you can no longer export the final result to an FBX. Now, could you simply bypass this 30-day expiration date by downloading the software on a virtual machine and basically resetting the timer, tricking the software into thinking you're using it on a different computer? Well, yes, but would I personally recommend that you do that? Hang on, guys, my phone's ringing. 1 second. Yep. Oh, the check cleared? Oh, okay, nice. All right, thanks for letting me know. All right, talk to you later. All right, bye. No, absolutely not. No, you should always pay the company for their overpriced products every single time. Yeah, I would never recommend that you would ever do that. Anyways, once it's finished loading, it should now open this tab basically asking for the height of the actor portrayed in the recording. Go ahead and move the blue character rig into position and try to match where the depth map is located. To adjust the height, select the scene tab and adjust the ground height fine-tuning accordingly. And select recenter coordinate systems to reset the dial and move the character back to the center of the grid. Once your data is lined close enough to your character rig, head over to the tracking and select refit pose. This will connect your actor to the depth data so your movements can now be translated to the rig. Once you've done this, click track forward and let it finish tracking you. If you notice any limbs start to jank out or stop tracking you for any reason, like you see here, then fixing it is pretty simple, but if admittedly tedious at times. Go ahead and open this individual body parts tracking panel and make sure only the limb that is giving you trouble is checked off. Once you do that, you can reposition the limb back where it's supposed to be and refit the pose in order to correct it. From here, you can hit track forward and finish off the rest of the animation with the correct tracking. If there's only a specific window or specific time frame where this issue is occurring, so say for example your arm stops tracking in the middle of your animation but is being tracked normally at the start and end of it, then all you really have to do is just adjust the region of interest at the bottom here to the section where the issue is occurring, repeat the previous steps, and start to iron out the problem until it isn't an issue anymore. If for whatever reason this isn't working at all, just remember that this animation doesn't have to be perfect, just usable. So in other words, a lot of the refining process will take place in Blender in order for you to not only cut out parts giving you trouble, but also for you to refine all the other parts of the animation as well. Do also keep in mind that the Kinect is entirely limited to what it can see, so unless you have another Kinect directly behind you, the Kinect is only going to capture depth data that it can see from its perspective. This means that if your entire arm or leg is out of view of the camera, then that means that there's no data for it to track anymore, so the arm or leg might start freaking out because it has no idea where it needs to be. This is why I'd recommend mainly sticking to acting out your scene facing perpendicular to the camera, because if you're sideways and you're only using one camera, then the Kinect is not going to like x-ray through your body to pick up what your leg and arm is doing on the other side of what it can't see. However, if your arm and leg is in view on the other side of your body, then you could probably get away with recording some side views. You just have to make sure it, for the most part, remains that way. You can also enable head tracking as well. However, I personally wouldn't recommend you use it since in most cases it can look pretty bad. Instead, I'd recommend just animating the head by hand once we get into Blender. You'll also notice that this method only records body mocap and not finger mocap. Along with the head, the fingers and hand movements are just going to also have to be something you animate manually in Blender. One final thing, if you need your movements to be a lot smoother in general, then you can smooth them out with this intensity bar right here. This will apply a smoothing modifier and make sharp movements less sharp based on what you need. Once you think your animation is good enough, go over to the export section. I'd recommend exporting the target character to a UE4 mannequin because it's worked the best for me, at least in terms of retargeting this data to Mixamo rigs. After that, go ahead and hit export animation, make sure you export as an FBX, name the file something, and then save it in a place where you can retrieve it later to be used in Blender. I would mainly leave all this stuff alone and just hit OK, but once you do that, congratulations, you've just created a mocap animation without having to spend $3,000 in order to do it, so, good job. So, in order to actually transfer this data onto a character or rig of your choice, we're going to need an extra add-on before we get started in Blender. Go ahead and go up to Edit and then down to Preferences in Blender. Head over to the Add-ons tab and then press Install. Look for that Rococo add-on I told you to download at the beginning of the video, press Install add-on, and then make sure the add-on is checked. Go ahead and make sure to save preferences just to be safe. Once you've done that, you can now close out of this window and go ahead and open this little pop-out tab on the right of the viewport right here. From here, you should see a tab that says Rococo. Go ahead and either create a Rococo account or sign into an existing one right here, whatever you need to do in order to get these options available to you. Once they are, open up this drop-down menu that says Retargeting. This source section is going to be the armature that has the animation already on it, so that FBX file we just made in this tutorial, and the target section is going to be the rig that you want to transfer the animation data to. Import both your mocap data as well as the rig you want to transfer data to. From here, you can set up the appropriate rigs and select Create Bone List. This will go through the individual bones of both rigs and match them up accordingly to their positions as well as the relative names. So go ahead and run through this list and make sure everything checks out and it's not accidentally matching the left arm to the right arm or something like that. Once everything checks out, go ahead and make sure both rigs are in a T-pose. Your mocapped rig should already be in a T-pose if you started with one in the recording. However, if you need to make sure that your target rig's reset pose is a T-pose, then the way to check that is to go into pose mode, select all the bones, clear transform, and then all. This will clear any transformations on the rig and set it back to what should be a T-pose. If your character does anything else like an A-pose or whatnot, just go ahead and make it a T-pose, apply the armature modifiers to the mesh to make sure it doesn't move, then hit apply pose as reset pose once you've put the character into a T-pose, and then finally reapply all your armature modifiers back to your mesh. Once both your target and source rigs are roughly lined up with each other and are both in T-poses, you can go ahead and retarget your animation. Set pose to current because I've tried using reset pose and it usually gives me weird results. Give it some time to do its thing and voila, your mocapped animation is now transferred to your rig. Do also bear in mind that this method of retargeting is not only exclusive to Mixamo rigs. I mainly use Mixamo rigs to make refinement of the mocap data much easier, which I'll show you how to do in a minute, but you technically could do this with any biped rig so long as the bones roughly match up with each other. For example, here's me transferring this data to an animatronic rig. Pretty cool, huh? Anyways, now on to refinement. So refinement on the mocap will mainly consist of correcting the data itself in order to fit the specific scenes you have in mind. The easiest way to do this is to use rig controls, which for those of you using Mixamo rigs is a very simple process to create. With the Mixamo add-on, you can select a rig and generate rig controls, making it easier to refine your mocap data. Now you can simply just move the hand where you need it to be, and the rest of the arm should follow along. Why you would do this is if you want to make, say for instance, animations with a character using a gun, then you need to be able to move the hands into the right positions in order to accurately hold the gun correctly, and also to accurately perform reloads and whatnot. This method is mainly used to refine the mocap data to make sure it's doing exactly what you need it to do, and also work non-destructively, meaning that any changes you make shouldn't hurt the source animation, and you can revert back to the original at any time. The way we go about doing this is through Blender's NLA editor. Think of this panel kind of like a video editing software for animation. You have your video clips that you can trim and cut pieces of, and then you have your tracks, which are like your video editing layers. But essentially from here we can turn our mocapped animation into a single clip that we can also manipulate and modify through this panel right here. You can control the start and end points of a clip, so if you want to make it start or end on a specific frame, this is where you would do that. Extrapolation is what the rig does once this animation is over, so you can either have it hold its last frame positions depending on where the clip is, or you can have it hold forward, which only will hold the last frame of the animation going forward. Or you can just have it do nothing, in which case it'll just revert back to a regular T-pose. Right here is your blending options, which will control how your individual clips will blend together. Replace will do what it says and replace the action of the clip, whereas combine will combine the animation data of both tracks into one action. Blend in and out are like your fade in and fade out controls. These will help you make smooth transitions between your animation clips. Finally, you've got your action clip settings, which control the individual clips itself, which allows you to repeat the clip or control the speed or trim the start and end points. Alright, so with that hopefully explained, the way to actually refine mocap data is essentially only to make changes to the control rig itself. So we're basically using separate animation tracks that are layered and blended together using the combine blending function. Essentially, the idea is to create a new track over the existing track, and then make sure this new animation is set to combine and then hold forward. From here, we can create a keyframe before the change you want to make sure you always have a reset point. Make a change in the animation, and then go ahead and reset that back once you need the change to be over. So say, for instance, I wanted this arm to go higher, but only for a few seconds. Well, all I'd have to do is keyframe no change being made, go to the part where I want the change to be made, and then raise his arm higher. By the way, make sure auto keying is on so that any changes you made will actually be captured. Once he puts his arm back down, though, you'll notice that it's not the same as before because the change we made is still being applied. So from here, all we have to do is just copy and paste our reset frame to the point where we want our animation to be like the original again. And now the arm will now raise higher at this specific point while keeping the rest of the animation untouched. By the way, if at any point you mess up the refinement process, you can just simply delete the keyframes or just the entire track in general above it, and the original mocap animation at the bottom should go untouched. Another refinement technique is Alt-O over in the graph editor. This will allow you to auto-smooth out parts of the animation so you can smooth out specific parts of the body as well as over specific amounts of time instead of just applying it to the entire animation like the smoothing function in IPI. Also, fun fact, you could also just use all of these features I showed you for pretty much anything in your scene that's mocap, so technically you could apply all this knowledge to camera mocap. You can refine clips, trim them, speed them up, slow them down, and technically smooth them out with all these techniques. I primarily use this smoothing tool to just smooth out hard angles or errors made by the mocap software. However, if you want to simply cut out entire portions of the animation, then that's completely fine as well. To open up the animation clip, go ahead and press Tab like you're going into edit mode, and from here you can modify the motion path of the animation itself in the graph editor, or simply delete sections of the animation that's giving you trouble. When it comes to holding objects, that's done mainly through copy location and rotation constraints. Essentially, if you have a weapon that requires two hands to wield, I'll have the weapon's main axis parented to the dominant hand controller, and then I'll move the other hand into position and then have it copy a location and the rotation of an axis that's parented to the gun itself. Now at any point, if I want him to hold a gun while performing the mocap animation, I can define when and how he holds it. This applies to really anything in my animation that requires of character to hold it with two hands. So for example, the crowbar used towards the end of Police Archive, the pistol used at the beginning. Really, the sky's the limit with this kind of stuff as long as you know how to make it happen. So in terms of refining the feet data, normally I'll just go through the graph editor and refine it manually by picking out certain frames and then adjusting them with proportional editing at the top here. That'll move the other keyframes in respect to the main one that you're moving it to ensure smooth roll-off. There's also a driver you could put on the foot controller in order to have it react to the ground a lot more naturally. I'll put a link in the description to a Royal Skies video explaining what it is, but essentially it's a driver that controls the foot's angle relative to the ground, and it should clean up about 80% of what you do, but you might have to make some minor adjustments here and there in order to adapt it to a Mixmo rig controllers. Now, in terms of facial mocap, this might have to be something I talk about in another video, not only because this video is getting a bit too long now, but also because I haven't really worked out all the kinks of it yet to make it look a lot more natural. So this might be a video I might release a little after the next tape comes out, so I wouldn't really expect it anytime soon. However, I would expect maybe a video or two going over some bug fixes and just some extra refinements and just overall stuff I forgot to mention in my workflow video. Just, expect videos like that sometime in the future. But anyways, that's the way that I personally go about making my mocap animations. I know that this method may not exactly be cheap in some people's eyes due to the price tag of some of these softwares, but I mean, compared to the usual price of mocap equipment, I mean, I think it's just a compromise you need to make based on your budget. I mean, this stuff ain't cheap to do, you know, and it's certainly not easy to make look good. So taking a part of your budget as well as having the correct skills and knowledge to make it happen isn't an unusual thing. Hopefully at some point AI motion capture can get to the point where it looks just as good, if not better than the method I just showed you, but as of now, it's just not there yet in my opinion. Also, do keep in mind that there are definitely ways to do mocap with VI trackers and full body tracking equipment, so if you're someone who has that equipment already lying around, then I would definitely look into how to do mocap with your VR equipment, because it's entirely possible. And I mean, all things considered, it doesn't look half bad. So I mean, you know, if you're someone who plays VR chat and you have full body tracking, then I definitely look into using your trackers for mocap. But at the end of the day, it's just going to come down to whether or not you have enough drive to make this happen. Keep in mind, we are using technology that is typically only used by animation studios and video game companies, so the fact that people like us have access to this technology for a hell of a lot cheaper than what most people pay to make this happen, I mean, I think it's pretty impressive. But of course, that's just my opinion at least. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video or found it insightful in some way. Let me know if you want to see more 10 to 20 minute videos like this, where it's just tutorials of me explaining how my work process goes, because these are pretty easy to produce and a lot easier for me to get out for you guys. But anyways, that's all from me. Hope this tutorial helps you guys out in your future endeavors going forward, and I can't wait to see what you guys make using this video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.